When I found a neon orange violation notice slapped on my old fishing boat, I nearly laughed. The HOA demanded I move it within 48 hours or face a $500 daily fine. What they didn't know was simple. Not only was that my boat, I actually owned the entire lake. I stared at the letter, the words almost glowing with arrogance. Remove your boat within 48 hours or face a $500 daily fine. They even threatened to tow it away at my expense. For a moment, I thought it had to be some kind of prank. Who in their right mind would tell me to move my own boat from my own dock? But as I read the signature at the bottom, it became clear. Richard Wilkins, president of the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association. The name alone dripped with smug authority, the kind of man who probably polished his mailbox to meet community standards. The language of the letter was even worse. Condescending, legalistic, written like they were scolding a misbehaving child. My crime? Apparently, my boat violated community visual guidelines and diminished the aesthetic appeal of shared waters. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. Shared waters? These people had no clue. The lake they claimed to manage wasn't theirs, and it sure wasn't the HOA's. It was mine. Still, as I folded the letter, I felt a spark of irritation harden into resolve. If they wanted a fight, I was more than ready. 6 months earlier, I had left behind Silicon Valley, a decade of startup grind, and a career that had burned me out completely. Selling my cybersecurity company gave me financial freedom, but what I craved wasn't money, it was peace. And for that, I turned to a place I hadn't visited in years, my grandfather's lake. Sullivan Lake wasn't just water and trees. My grandfather had bought the 50-acre property back in the 1950s, when it was nothing but farmland and wild forest. He built a small cabin, raised his children, and spent his last decades teaching me how to fish. Some of my earliest memories were on that dock, listening to him say, "Water is life, Jake. Never let anyone tell you profit comes before nature." He fought off mining companies, stood up to developers, and kept the lake pristine. When he passed, my father inherited it, though he never connected with it in the same way. And when both of them were gone, it became mine. Moving back wasn't just about escape, it was about legacy. This lake wasn't a hobby. It was history, family, and responsibility. That's why, when the HOA came swinging at me with threats, I didn't just see a letter. I saw an insult to 3 generations of Sullivan pride. And I knew. I wouldn't let it stand. The next morning, I walked down to the dock with a mug of steaming coffee, expecting calm waters and birdsong. Instead, I saw it, a fluorescent orange paper taped right onto my boat. The words screamed in bold black letters, "Violation Notice." They listed my supposed crimes: unauthorized watercraft, inconsistent with community aesthetics, failure to register vessel with HOA. At the bottom, another threat: removal by force. At first, I thought it was some kid's prank. But when I walked back to my cabin, there it was again, an official letter in my mailbox, signed by Wilkins himself. That was when the laughter faded. These people were serious. And the more I thought about it, the more absurd it became. Not only had they taped an eyesore notice to my grandfather's fishing boat, they were essentially claiming ownership of a lake they didn't own. I sipped the rest of my coffee, narrowed my eyes across the rippling water, and muttered, "You've picked the wrong Sullivan to mess with." Later that day, my phone buzzed. It was Ray, my nearest neighbor, a wiry old man in his 70s who had built his house by hand and knew everyone's business. "Morning, Jake," he said, his voice carrying a laugh. "I see the welcoming committee found you." I told him about the letter and the sticker. He sighed. "Those HOA vultures have been circling for years. They tried to find me once for my boat shed. I told Richard Wilkins where he could shove his notice, and he's left me alone since. But they're probably hoping us old folks die off so they can tighten their grip." Then he dropped the bombshell. "You do know they've been using your lake, right? Fishing tournaments, private club meetings, the whole 9 yards. They even call themselves the elite anglers. Bunch of city boys with fancy gear who couldn't catch a cold." I froze. My lake. My family's lake. Being used like some country club playground? Ray chuckled bitterly. "Your grandfather would have chased them out with a shotgun full of rock salt." I wasn't laughing anymore. Because Ray was right. They weren't just trespassing. They were treating my property like their empire. Curiosity boiling into anger, I opened my laptop and searched the Maple Creek HOA website. There it was, plain as day, glossy photos of fishing derbies, men in expensive vests holding up bass like trophies, and crowds gathered along the eastern shore, my eastern shore. Then I saw the announcement, Annual Elite Anglers Championship, $5,000 prize pool. The date? The following weekend. Scrolling through years of archived posts, I saw evidence of event after event. Barbecues, tournaments, even a temporary dock they had built without permission. They had been doing this for at least 5 years. And the wording made me laugh in disbelief. Our community's crown jewel. The audacity was staggering. I slammed the laptop shut, my pulse pounding. They had taken advantage of the fact that no one lived in the cabin full-time, slowly weaving the illusion that the lake belonged to them. But illusions only work until someone shows the truth. And they had no idea their biggest event of the year would also be their last. I needed expertise. So I called Emma, an old college friend who had become an environmental lawyer. When I explained, she burst out laughing. "Wait, let me get this straight," she said. "You own the lake. Deed, water rights, everything. And they're telling you to move your own boat? Jake, this is priceless." I confirmed it all. "Then here's the deal," she continued. "Don't respond yet. Gather evidence. Document everything. Install cameras around the lake. And whatever you do, if they try to tow your boat, that's theft. Make sure you record it." Her confidence was infectious. By nightfall, I had security cameras with motion alerts hidden along the shoreline, pointed exactly where their tournaments usually set up. As I looked over the lake that evening, I felt calmer. They thought I was just some recluse with an old boat. They had no clue I had resources, a lawyer, and time to burn. If they wanted to flex their authority, they were about to learn what real authority looked like. A few days later, I received an email about the upcoming HOA meeting. Curiosity got the better of me. If these people wanted to run my lake, I wanted to see them in action. The community center looked more like a courthouse. Columns, fountain, polished floors. Inside, about 30 residents sat in folding chairs, most looking bored. Then Richard Wilkins stepped up. Mid-50s, silver hair, blue blazer with shiny gold buttons. He oozed fake charm as he droned about lawn regulations and mailbox designs. Finally, he got to the lake. "We've had reports of an unauthorized boat being stored on community waters," he said. "Remember, all watercraft must be registered with the HOA to maintain our aesthetic standards." I raised my hand. Heads turned. "And who owns the lake exactly?" I asked casually. The room stirred. Wilkins' smile flickered. "The lake is a community resource under HOA management. Do you have the deed?" I pressed. "Or is it county-owned?" Now people were really listening. His knuckles whitened on the podium. "There are historical arrangements in place," he snapped. "Details irrelevant to this meeting." I leaned back, smiling. "Interesting. I'd love to see those documents sometime." His eyes darkened, and I caught a whisper to his vice president. "Accelerate the timeline. Deal with the Sullivan situation." Whatever game they were playing, I had just rattled the board. The next morning, I walked to my dock and froze. My boat was gone. All that remained was another violation notice nailed to the wood, claiming my vessel had been impounded for non-compliance. If I wanted it back, I had to pay $750 and sign a compliance agreement. My blood boiled. They hadn't just threatened. They had stolen. I called the sheriff's office, but the deputy dismissed it as a civil dispute. His hesitation told me everything. The HOA had friends in high places. For a moment, I felt powerless. But then my grandfather's words echoed in my mind, "When you're angry, think clearer than ever." This wasn't just about a boat anymore. It was about standing up to bullies. And I wasn't going to back down. Emma arrived the next day. We spread out deeds, maps, and county records across my dining table. Her verdict was immediate. "Jake, this is ironclad. You own the lake. Period." Then she uncovered something worse. A development application filed by the HOA, A luxury lakeside resort, complete with condos, golf course, and a marina. And guess which lake they planned to build it on? Sullivan Lake. My lake. Emma's eyes narrowed. They've been laying groundwork for years. Using the lake, convincing residents it's theirs, waiting until the perfect time to cash in. I clenched my fists. All those fishing tournaments weren't just arrogance. They were rehearsals. But now, their biggest tournament was days away. Dozens of boats, investors, photographers, all of them gathering illegally on my land. Emma smiled. Let them host their grand event. We'll have cameras rolling, evidence ready, and the law on our side. Their trap was already set. The day arrived bright and clear. From my deck, I watched a parade of trucks towing shiny boats toward the eastern shore. By noon, the shoreline was buzzing. Tents, banners, even a temporary bar. A giant sign read, 15th Annual Elite Anglers Championship. Emma arrived with her camera. We counted over 40 people, 15 boats, and more cars still arriving. Then Richard showed up with a group of investors, all suits and sunglasses, flipping through glossy brochures. Those are the money men, Emma whispered. We crept closer with telephoto lenses, catching Richard pointing at the shorelines. Exclusive waterfront, no competition, full control, he boasted. That was all we needed. Emma filed for an emergency injunction, and within hours, the sheriff himself arrived with a deputy. The deputy's voice rang out, "Ladies and gentlemen, you are trespassing on private property. You are ordered to vacate immediately." The crowd erupted in confusion. Gerald Thompson, head of the Anglers Club, stormed over shouting. But Emma coolly presented the deed and the court order. Game over. Richard shoved through the crowd, his investors watching nervously. "This is absurd," he barked. "We've managed this lake for decades." Emma handed him the deed. "That's a lie. The Sullivan family has owned this lake since 1953. You've misled your residents and investors. That's fraud." The word hung in the air. Fraud. The investors exchanged uneasy looks. One muttered, "You told us you had full control." Richard's face paled. He turned to me, eyes blazing. "You don't know who you're dealing with, Sullivan. I have connections in this county." I smiled coldly. "And I have recordings of you lying to your investors. How do you think they'll feel when I release those?" For the first time, Richard looked afraid. The tournament collapsed in chaos. Boats hauled out, tents torn down, investors disappearing into their cars. By evening, the lake was empty again. But the story didn't stay quiet. Local reporter Sarah Lynn ran a front-page article the next day. HOA misleads residents, attempts illegal resort development. The residents were furious. At an emergency HOA meeting, they demanded answers. Richard didn't even show. His vice president tried to calm the crowd, but it backfired. People shouted about fees they had paid for lake maintenance that never existed. Several board members resigned on the spot. Meanwhile, the county launched an investigation into misappropriated funds. Richard's investors threatened lawsuits for deception. And within weeks, Richard himself skipped town, leaving nothing but a trail of angry homeowners and failed dreams. For the first time in years, Sullivan Lake was quiet. Peaceful. Mine again. But I didn't want revenge to be the final chapter. Working with honest residents, I helped create the Sullivan Lake Conservation Trust, a nonprofit to preserve the lake and allow controlled community access. Anyone who respected the land could fish or boat, but this time, the funds actually went into conservation. We even reformed the fishing club, stripped of its elitism. The new Sullivan Lake anglers welcomed locals and kids, teaching respect for the water instead of exploiting it. Judge Michael Davis, a retired resident, became the trust's first president. Honest, transparent, everything Richard never was. As summer turned to fall, I often sat on the dock, watching the sun paint the water gold. The same dock where my grandfather once told me, "Water is life. Protect it." Now his lake was safe. And every ripple across its surface reminded me, I hadn't just won a fight. I'd honored a legacy.